Long ago, in the ancient kingdom of Eldoria, there ruled a mighty king named King Eleric. His empire stretched far beyond the borders of the known lands. He possessed everything a ruler could wish for: wealth, power, and respect. Yet his heart carried a deep sorrow. He had no heir. He had sought every remedy. He summoned the wisest physicians and the most revered monks, but fate seemed deaf to his prayers. The thought of dying childless gnawed at him like a restless shadow. One bright morning, while hunting in the royal forest with his advisors, King Eleric spotted a graceful stag darting out from the thick brush. The animal's silver coat shimmered like moonlight. The king's archers raised their bows, but before they could strike, Eleric ordered, "Do not harm it. Bring it to me alive." The stag bounded through the forest, and Alaric's horse leapt forward in pursuit. Hooves thundered across the woodland floor as the hunt swept through the trees. The stag was swift, and the king's steed, fierce and loyal, raced like an arrow behind it. Before long, the king found himself far ahead of his men. The forest grew dense, shadows swallowing the trail. His horse snorted heavily, its strength nearly spent. Still, Alaric pressed on. The stag disappeared behind a hill, and when the king reached its peak, it was gone. No tracks, no sound, only the whisker of wind through the leaves. Realizing he had lost both his prey and his way, Alaric turned his horse back, but every direction looked unfamiliar. As dusk fell, the forest grew darker and eerily silent. The once brave king felt the creeping chill of unease. Then, far in the distance, to the north, he saw a thin trail of smoke rising through the trees. Hope stirred in his chest. He spurred his horse toward it. After some time, he arrived at a small stone cottage from whose chimney the smoke curled lazily into the twilight sky. He dismounted, tied his horse, and stepped inside. Within sat an old sage, eyes closed, deep in meditation. Alaric, though a king, bowed in respect and sat quietly beside him. After a while, the sage opened his eyes and smiled as though he had been expecting him. Without a word of surprise, he picked up a small clay bowl and said, "Bring me water from the pond outside." The king obeyed without hesitation. When he returned, the sage drank half the water and offered the rest to Alaric. "Drink," he said. Alaric drank. Then the sage spoke softly. "I know who you are, King of Eldoria, and I know the ache within your heart. I asked you to bring water to test your humility, and I am pleased. Even with all your power, you carry no pride." Alaric bowed. "Wise one, then you must also know my grief, the emptiness of being without a child." A sage's eyes twinkled. "Your destiny is not barren, my son. You will have a child. Take this apple," he said, lifting a golden fruit from a woven basket. "Give it to your queen. When she eats it, the heavens will bless your home." The king accepted the apple reverently. Before leaving, he asked, "O holy man, show me the way back to my kingdom, for I have lost my path." The sage replied, "Mount your horse, face the north, close your eyes, and recite the sacred words thrice. When you open them, you will find yourself where your hunt began." "And if ever I wish to return to you?" asked the king. "Face this forest, close your eyes, and utter the same words 3 times. You shall find this cottage once more." The sage closed his eyes again, resuming his prayer. King Alaric stepped outside, mounted his horse, and did as he was told. The next moment, he heard voices, his men calling his name. They had been searching for him frantically. Relief swept through the camp as they saw their king alive and unharmed. That night, they returned to the castle. Alaric told the queen, Lady Seraphina, all that had happened and handed her the enchanted apple. She ate it with gratitude and faith. Months passed, and soon the prophecy was fulfilled. The queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, with eyes as bright as the morning sky. the kingdom erupted in joy. Bells rang, feasts were held, and gold was showered upon the Pullen. To mark the 8th day after her birth, King Alaric declared a grand celebration. Sorcerers, poets, and seers from every corner of Eldoria were invited. But there was one sorcerer, Malvin, the dark wizard of the Black Tower, who received no invitation. For Alaric despised him. Malvin was a creature of cruelty. His castle was built from the skulls of men, and in place of water, he drank the blood of the innocent. The following day, the grand celebration began, a festival that outshone any held before in the kingdom of Eldoria. Noblemen, poets, seers, and enchanters from every corner of the land gathered to bless the newborn princess and offer gifts glittering with gold and gemstones. As night fell and the guests began to leave, King Alaric went to visit his daughter's chamber. But before he could step inside, a violent blast of wind shook the palace. The torches flickered, and in the middle of the room appeared Malvin, the dark sorcerer of the Black Tower. His eyes blazed with fire, his face pale and twisted like a withered skull. Before the king could speak, Malvin's voice cracked through the air. "You dared to celebrate without me, Alaric? No matter. I have brought a gift for your precious child." He moved toward the cradle. The guards drew their swords, but he raised a single hand, and they froze like statues. Then, with a wicked grin, he slipped his finger into the infant princess's mouth. The baby, innocent and unaware, began to suckle softly. Malvin withdrew his hand and hissed, "Remember my gift, mighty king. On the day she turns 16, your lovely daughter shall shrink until she is no taller than your hand." "No, you monster!" cried the king. Malvin laughed, his voice echoing like thunder. "So it shall be. Nothing can break this curse." A flash of blue light burst across the room, and the sorcerer vanished, leaving only the faint scent of smoke behind. Panic spread through the castle. The king summoned every sage and magician in Eldoria to undo the curse. But after 3 days of desperate rituals, their conclusion was grim. The curse cannot be broken, only faced when the time comes. Defeated, the king could only pray. The princess, named Princess Aurelia, grew older, her beauty blooming like dawn on crystal waters. Her grace and charm became the talk of every realm. Songs were sung in her name, and portraits of her angelic face adorned every noble hall. But destiny was waiting. On the day she turned 16, as Aurelia played with her companions in the royal gardens, laughter filling the air, her joy turned into terror. Before anyone could comprehend, her body began to shrink. Her friends screamed and rushed to the palace. King Alaric ran like a madman, abandoning his throne room. When he reached her, the curse had already begun its dreadful work. The princess was shrinking before his eyes, smaller, smaller, until by sunset, she was no taller than his hand. Every healer, alchemist, and mystic in the realm tried to reverse it. Rare herbs were brewed, chants were sung, spells were cast, all in vain. The king's fury burned hotter with each failure. He swore he would tear Malvin limb from limb if ever he found him. Weeks passed. The princess remained trapped in her tiny form, fragile as a doll. Desperate, the Council of Elders advised the king, "Go to the Dark Tower, plead with Malvin himself. Only he can undo what he has done." Though his pride screamed against it, a father's heart yielded. King Alaric mounted his steed and rode to the desolate plains where the Black Tower stood, a monstrous fortress built from human skulls. Hollow moans echoed through its walls, and, whenever an intruder dared approach, the skulls would wail, calling their master forth. The king entered the tower, his courage unshaken. Malvin awaited him on a throne of bones. "Welcome, King of Eldoria," he sneered. "I wronged you once," said Alaric solemnly. "I should have invited you to the celebration. But spare my daughter, lift the curse, and I shall honor you with a feast greater than before." The sorcerer's lips curled into a smile. "She shall be restored," he said, "but only on one condition." "What is it?" the king demanded. "When she is whole again, you shall give her hand to me in marriage." Alaric's eyes flared with rage. "Never! I would rather see her suffer forever than wed her to a monster like you." Malvin rose, fury twisting his face. "Then suffer you shall. One day your pride will break, and you will crawl to me for mercy." With that, he turned his back, and the shadows swallowed the king's path. Broken-hearted, Alaric left the tower. The sound of the skull's wailing followed him like a curse upon the wind. As he rode back through the forest, his mind burned with despair, until suddenly he remembered the old sage who had once blessed him with the apple as life. Hope flickered. He turned his horse toward the ancient woods where, 17 years earlier, destiny had first smiled upon him. When he reached the place, he closed his eyes and whispered the sacred words thrice. When he opened them, the cottage stood once again before him. But when he entered, a stranger sat in prayer. The old sage was gone. The new hermit lifted his head and said gently, "The one you seek has passed away 2 years ago. His spirit rests within." The king's heart sank like a stone. He asked to visit the sage's resting place, and the hermit pointed to a small door behind him. Inside, by candlelight, lay a simple tomb. King Alaric knelt beside it and whispered a prayer, his tears falling onto the cold stone. As he turned to leave, the hermit spoke, "Stay, my son. A master's spirit has decreed that any who visit his grave must spend one night beneath this roof." The king agreed and rested within the humble cottage. That night, in his dreams, the sage appeared, radiant and calm. "Why do you despair, my child? My body may rest, but my spirit lives. Your purpose will be fulfilled. At dawn, ride 10 furlongs south. There you will find 3 trees entwined as one. Dig beneath the middle tree. You shall find a chest containing a lamp. Take it home, and in a sealed room, light the lamp before your daughter. As the flame turns upward, she will grow back to her true form." When morning came, Alaric awoke renewed with hope. He prayed, mounted his horse, and rode swiftly toward the horizon, toward the place where 3 ancient trees stood bound together, waiting to reveal the secret of the enchanted lamp. Deep in the forest of Eldoria, just as the sage had promised, King Alaric found the 3 ancient trees, their roots and branches intertwined like the fingers of fate. He drew his sword and began to dig beneath the middle one. The earth was dense and old, breathing the scent of centuries. After a few strikes, a sharp hiss broke the stillness. From a branch above, a serpent uncoiled itself, long, black, and glimmering with venom. It lunged toward the king, but Alaric moved with the reflex of a seasoned warrior. His blade flashed, and the snake was cleaved into pieces before it touched the ground. Wiping his sword, the king continued. Soon his blade struck something hard. He knelt, cleared the soil with his hands, and there it was, a golden chest carved with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Inside the chest lay a small crystal lamp, the gift the sage had spoken of. Alaric carried it close to his heart and rode back swiftly. Standing before the hermit's hut, he whispered the sacred words 3 times, and in the blink of an eye, he found himself back in the royal forest near his palace. That night, he gathered his courage and entered the sealed chamber where his daughter, Princess Aurelia, lay upon a silk cushion, no taller than his hand. He lit the enchanted lamp. Its flame flickered, once, twice, then turned upright, glowing like sunrise. Before his eyes, The princess began to grow. Her tiny form stretched, her limbs restored, her beauty returned in full bloom. When the flame finally died, Aurelia stood before him, alive and radiant as ever. Tears streamed down the king's face. Bells rang throughout Eldoria. The people rejoiced, celebrating their merciful ruler and the miracle that had restored their beloved princess. But joy is a fragile thing. As the kingdom rejoiced, the air within the palace suddenly turned cold. A dark wind blew through the hall, and in a flash of crimson light, Malvin appeared once more. "You thought you could defy me, Alaric?" he thundered. "Now I will strike a blow that even your gods cannot undo." His eyes burned like twin fires. He raised his hand, and from thin air, a dagger of black steel appeared. He dragged it across his own arm. Blood poured forth in a scarlet stream. Holding his palm aloft, he whispered a curse, and droplets of blood scattered toward the princess. The sorcerer's laughter echoed as he vanished. Within moments, Aurelia cried out in pain. Her skin blistered, sores erupting across her body. By nightfall, she was covered in wounds, her beauty lost to suffering. Her screams filled the palace, and then silence as she fainted from agony. The royal healers tried everything, but no remedy worked. Alaric, once again desperate, turned to the hermit. That night, in a dream, the voice of the old sage spoke to him once more. "The princess's cure lies in the blood of the two-headed lion, the beast that holds Malvin's life within it. Only its blood can undo this curse, though it will take a full year for her to heal." The king pleaded, "Tell me where to find it. I would give my own life to save her." The voice replied, "Its death is not written by your hand, my son. Another shall come, destined to face the beast and free the princess. Wait for him." When the king awoke, he knew what to do. The next morning, he proclaimed across the realm, "Whosoever brings the blood of the two-headed lion shall wed Princess Aurelia and inherit the throne of Eldoria." Far away in the outskirts of a humble town, a young woodcutter named Adrian swung his axe one final time before gathering his bundle of firewood. He wiped the sweat from his brow and began his walk back to the city. As he neared the marketplace, a crowd had gathered around a herald reading the royal decree. "By order of His Majesty King Alaric, whosoever brings the blood of the two-headed lion shall be granted the hand of Princess Aurelia and the throne of Eldoria." Adrian's heart pounded. For reasons he could not explain, it felt as if destiny itself had whispered his name. But hunger broke his daydream, and he wandered into a tavern for a meager meal, spending the few coins he had earned. He returned to his small shack at the city's edge, a place barely standing, much like his lonely life. Orphaned as a child, he had no family left, except the memory of a sister who had been taken from him long ago. 10 years had passed, and she had never been found. That night, Adrian could not sleep. Two voices warred within him, one urging him to take the quest, the other warning him against folly. At dawn, he decided to leave his fate to his spiritual master, the same sage who had once guided King Alaric. He took his sword, borrowed a horse from a friend, and rode to the forest. There, he turned north and whispered the sacred words 3 times. When he opened his eyes, he stood before the familiar cottage. He visited the sage's tomb, offered his prayers, and fell asleep beside it. In his dream, the spirit of the sage appeared and spoke. "Adrian, your path is righteous. To aid the suffering is the highest of deeds. You will face many trials. Do not yield, for those who endure pain find the path to glory. When you awaken, you will find a ring and an amulet near my resting place. The ring will guide you, and the amulet will shield you from dark enchantments. When morning came, Adrian found the ring and amulet just as foretold. He slipped the ring onto his finger and the amulet around his neck. The moment he stepped outside, the ring whispered in a voice that only he could hear. To the north, 10 leagues from where you stand, lies the Citadel of Shadows. Within its depths lies the lair of the two-headed lion. But beware, by day, the beast slumbers in the form of a serpent. Only when night falls does it awaken as the creature of flame and fang. Adrian mounted his horse and rode north. After a long and weary journey, he saw it, a dark fortress rising from the mist, black smoke spiraling into the heavens. He stopped half a mile away, waiting beneath a tree for night to fall. Exhausted, he dozed off with his sword beside him. When he awoke, the moon hung high. Adrian whispered a prayer, gripped his blade, and walked toward the citadel. A fog descended, thick and blinding. From the ring came a whisper. "Fear not the mist. Walk forward, and no matter what voices you hear, do not stop, and do not look back, or you shall be blinded forever." He pressed on. From the shadows came shrieks and wails, voices of the damned, women screaming for help, the sound of chains and death. Among them, one voice struck his heart cold, a voice of his lost sister, crying his name. Tears welled in his eyes, but he remembered the sage's warning. He kept walking. When at last the mist cleared, Adrian found himself in a vast moonlit garden. Before he could take a step, a deep growl shook the air. From the shadows emerged the two-headed lion, its eyes burning crimson, its breath like fire. The beast lunged. Adrian dodged, but its massive claws sent his sword flying across the field. He rolled aside, kicked the monster's belly, sending it crashing into a tree. The creature roared, leaping again. This time, its fangs sank deep into Adrian's shoulder. Pain seared through his body, and the battle for destiny began. A roar of pain tore from Adrian's throat as the two-headed lion's fangs sank deep into his shoulder. The attack was swift and merciless, the kind that could shatter even the bravest soul. The beast's claws raked across his flesh, its growl shaking the ground beneath them. With a cry of fury, Adrian locked his arms around one of its necks and heaved with all his strength. The monster thrashed violently, its scales scraping his skin. Finally, with a desperate twist, Adrian hurled the creature aside. It struck the earth with a thunderous crash, shrieking like a storm-torn demon. The beast's mane rose, stiff as iron thorns, and its body swelled like a balloon ready to burst. Before Adrian could lift his sword, the monster lunged again, jaws snapping around his leg. Pain seared through him. He kicked with his free leg, once, twice, until his blade was back in his grasp. The next strike was pure instinct. The creature's teeth, steel met flesh, and the world filled with a hideous scream. The creature's twin heads fell to the earth, and its body convulsed once, twice, then lay still. As the first rays of dawn touched the fallen beast, a violent wind howled through the garden. When it died down, the carcass had transformed. No longer a lion, but a colossal giant, dead and terrible to behold. Its face was twisted in fury even in death, the mark of dark sorcery undone. Adrian, trembling, glanced at himself. His shoulder and leg were torn, his tunic soaked in blood. Yet the fire in his eyes burned stronger than ever. He had survived, but his trial was not over. He limped forward through the garden and came upon 3 ancient doors carved into the stone wall ahead. As he approached, the ring's voice whispered again, "Enter the 3rd door on your right, Adrian. Within lies the weeping tree. Find the one that cries." He obeyed, pushing open the heavy door. Inside lay a vast hall that led into a wondrous garden, unlike any he had ever seen. Trees of every color and fruit, shimmering under strange light. Holding his sword ready, Adrian moved carefully through the grove. He searched beneath the mango trees, then the pomegranate boughs, then among the silver vines, listening for the faint sound of crying. At last, in the farthest corner, he heard it, a soft, sorrowful sobbing coming from 3 trees standing together. He struck the first one. The crying stopped. He cut the second. Again, silence. But when his blade touched the third, the weeping grew louder, raw and human. From the severed branch poured fresh, red blood, as though he had cut through a living arm. Adrian's pulse quickened. This was the one. Then the ring whispered again, "Dig at its roots." He obeyed, digging into the earth with his sword. After only a few strikes, a violent gust tore through the air. Smoke rose all around him, thick and choking. And when it cleared, dwarves stood in a circle around him. 20, maybe more, each no taller than a child, their faces twisted, their eyes gleaming like coal. They raised tiny bows, arrows drawn. Before Adrian could strike, they vanished, gone, without a trace. He turned, searching, but saw only mist. Then, just as he bent to dig again, the dwarves reappeared at his feet and fired their arrows. Agony surged up his legs. He looked down, his feet were turning to stone. Smoke coiled around him, the petrification spreading upward, creeping toward his knees. "Adrian!" the ring's voice cried out. "Dig, quickly. Beneath this soil lies a stairway. If you reach the pool below, before the stone reaches your neck, you may yet live. If not, you will remain a statue forever." Gritting his teeth, Adrian forced himself to move. Each swing of his sword was heavier than the last. When at last the earth cracked open to reveal a stairway spiraling downward, the stone had already climbed to his chest. He shoved his sword into its sheath and threw himself forward, grabbing the steps with numb hands. The world blurred, his heart hammered, slowing. The petrification reached his throat. With one final burst of strength, he pulled himself through the opening. He tumbled down the stairs, rolling, crashing, and hit the floor below with a painful thud. His shoulder burned, his wounds reopened, but the stone curse stopped. He was alive. Coughing, Adrian dragged himself across the floor toward a faint shimmer ahead. A square pool of glimmering water, deep and ancient. He crawled on his hands, his half-stone legs dragging behind him. Then, whispering a prayer, he hurled himself in. The water was cold, painfully cold, but as it touched his skin, the stone began to melt away. His limbs softened, his breath steadied. For a long moment, he floated in silence. Far away in the Tower of Obsidian, the dark sorcerer Malvin stood before a clay effigy that moaned with the same sorrow Adrian had heard. His eyes burned with fury. He struck the effigy across the face, his voice shaking the chamber. "Your time draws near, Malvin," the effigy's hollow voice mocked. "Silence," he roared. "If this fails, I will cast your soul into the wastes, where even your screams will find no ears." He raised his hands, weaving them through the air in intricate gestures, whispering an incantation older than time. The surface of his crystal mirror shimmered with smoke, revealing the scene within. Adrian slaying the giant and descending toward the weeping tree. A cruel smile crept across the sorcerer's lips. The fool. He does not know the curse. No one can reach those stairs without turning to stone. Soon his heart will stop, and his quest will end. But when Malvin saw Adrian tumble through the stairway and survive, the smile vanished. His jaw clenched, eyes flaring with crimson rage. "He dares defy my fate. I will end him with my own hand." He turned toward the effigy again. "You will die with him. End this madness, Malvin." The The spirit within pleaded. You can still lift the curse from the princess and live. Trade your arm for her life, and your soul may yet be spared. Enough, he bellowed. I will destroy even your wretched spirit. Snatching a whip of burning iron from the wall, Nalvin struck the effigy. Each lash echoed through the tower, mixing with the spirit's cries, a sound that carried far into the dark night of Eldoria. The sorcerer Halric struck the clay effigy with his whip again and again, his fury echoing through the stone chamber. Each lash tore through the silence, and the hollow statue shuddered, releasing faint cries of pain, the trapped soul inside wailing in torment. Finally, Halric stopped, his chest heaving with rage. Now, he snarled, let your trembling spirit witness the fate of the young fool who dares defy me, the one who believes he can fulfill his destiny. He lifted a small clay bat from the altar, muttered a dark incantation, and hurled it toward the air. The moment it touched the ceiling, it transformed into a living creature, a monstrous bat with glowing crimson eyes, and vanished into the night sky. Halric turned toward the crystal orb beside him and waved his hand over it. The mist inside swirled, revealing a vision of Aiden, the young warrior, descending a long flight of stairs within the mountain temple. The bat soared swiftly through the skies and found its way to him. Yet, to Halric's disbelief, the demonic creature failed to harm Aiden. It shrieked, faltered, and was slain by the young man's enchanted blade. The sorcerer's jaw tightened. His eyes flared like burning coals. You dare mock me? He bellowed, grabbing a cloth and hurling it at the clay effigy. The statue screamed, a sound so hideous it shook the walls and then shattered into dust. I burn the souls of those who mock me, Halric hissed, his voice trembling with wrath. Let all who serve me know their fate. Before him stood several other clay figures, each one housing a trapped human soul. Halric turned again to the crystal orb, which now showed Aiden at the edge of a great underground pool. The sorcerer snatched a handful of bones from the floor and cast them into the blazing furnace beside him. Flames roared, and at once a metallic net appeared over the pool's surface in the vision. Halric smirked. Let's see you escape this, boy. But before his laughter could die, the talisman around Aiden's neck flared with light. A burst of fire shot forth, burning the iron net to ashes. The young warrior plunged safely into the pool below. Halric's eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible, he shouted. 3 times he has defied me. Rage consumed him. He seized the bronze gong from the corner and struck it with all his might. The resounding note filled the chamber, and at once, from every dark corridor, emerged skeletal warriors, hollow-eyed, bound by black sorcery. They shuffled toward him, weapons rattling, awaiting his command. Halric struck the gong again, and the undead halted, their bones quivering in eerie obedience. The sorcerer pointed at the orb, at Aiden, who was now climbing from the sacred pool, his wounds healed, his strength renewed. The young knight rose from the waters, astonished to find his legs no longer stone, his body whole once more. He thanked the divine and began to climb the steps out of the cavern. The ring upon his hand spoke in a soft whisper. Beyond this chamber lies a river. You will see a boat. Do not board it. Instead, cast your talisman into the waters and follow where it leads. Only then shall you cross safely. Aiden obeyed. Passing through an ancient archway, he found himself beside a vast silver river under an open sky. A solitary boat drifted toward him, adorned with velvet drapes and shining brass lamps, eerily inviting. Had the ring not warned him, he might have stepped aboard. Instead, he cast the talisman into the river. It floated gracefully, glowing faintly, guiding him forward. Aiden waded into the icy current, and followed its path. The boat glided alongside him, almost tempting him to climb aboard. The water grew colder, so cold it burned, but Aiden clenched his jaw and pressed on. He was halfway across when the chill became unbearable. Instinctively, he almost reached for the boat. "Do not," the ring's voice thundered in his mind. Summoning every ounce of will, he resisted the urge and trudged onward until at last he reached the opposite bank. The talisman lay waiting for him on the sand. Not far beyond, a towering fortress shimmered into view, its spires black against the dawn sky. But as he drew closer, it vanished like a mirage. Then the ring spoke again. "Ahead lies a forest. Seek the red-necked bull that dwells within. Slay it, take the fat from its belly, and strike the unseen wall 13 times. Only then shall the fortress reveal itself again." Aiden set off through the desolate woods. The air was still, the trees gnarled and lifeless. After much searching, he found the beast, a monstrous bull with horns sharp as sabers and eyes burning like embers. He devised a plan, blocking one exit with burning branches and digging a deep pit at the other. Then he provoked the creature by hurling stones. The first struck its neck, the second its brow, and the bull roared in fury, charging blindly. When the third stone pierced its eye, the beast went mad, storming straight into the pit. Aiden seized his chance, leaned over, and with one mighty swing, struck off its head, taking the fat from its belly. He counted 100 steps north and hurled it toward the invisible wall, 13 times in all. On the final strike, a thunderous boom split the air. The fortress appeared once more, its gates trembling open before him. Aiden dashed forward, broke through the ancient lock, and stepped inside. The moment he entered, the fat vanished from his hand. The castle was cloaked in dust and cobwebs, its halls silent as the grave. As he moved deeper, distant whispers echoed. Faint, haunting, almost human. He pressed on through one empty hall after another, until at last he entered a vast chamber lit by pale sunlight. There, upon a marble dais, stood a tall, bald man, his face cruel and his eyes full of malice. "Go back, boy," the man thundered, "for when I rise against a challenger, death follows." But Aiden did not retreat. The ring whispered once more. "When he casts his spells, raise the talisman. His magic will turn upon itself." Halric's twin, for this was the same dark power reborn, stamped his foot, and fire leapt from the floor toward Aiden. The young warrior raised the talisman, and the flame was instantly extinguished. Furious, the sorcerer unleashed a storm of fire, but each blaze died as it met the light of Aiden's charm. Roaring in rage, the dark mage called a sword from thin air. It flew straight toward Aiden's heart, yet the talisman burned brighter, setting the blade aflame until it dissolved into smoke. The sorcerer furled a skull next. It struck Aiden's arm, knocking the talisman from his grasp. Pain seared his skin. As he bent to retrieve it, another spectral sword appeared and plunged toward him. Aiden threw himself flat. The sword sliced the air above his head. He rolled, seized the talisman, and thrust it forward just as the weapon descended again. Flames burst forth, consuming the cursed steel. The sorcerer screamed, his final, furious cry echoing through the cursed hall as his own magic devoured him. At last, the sorcerer Halric was forced to draw his blade and face the young knight himself. Aiden, who had long awaited this moment, lunged forward like a storm unleashed. The chamber echoed with the clash of steel as their swords met again and again, each strike ringing with fury and fire. Halric struck downward with vicious strength, but Aiden caught the blow on his blade, twisted, and drove his boot into the sorcerer's gut. The dark mage staggered backward, gasping, and crashed against the wall. In an instant, Aiden flipped his sword into a dagger's grip, leapt high, and aimed for the sorcerer's heart. But Halric spun away, his counterattack slicing through the air. The blow was so fierce that Aiden's sword struck the marble floor and buried itself deep within the stone. Halric charged, his own blade raised high, but Aiden, quick as lightning, hooked his foot around the sorcerer's ankle, yanked, and freed his sword in one motion. With a roar, he swung, forcing Halric back. Blow after blow fell, sparks flew, the air itself seemed to tremble. The dark mage tried to defend, but Aiden's fury was unstoppable. Halric turned to dodge, and that single misstep was his doom. The knight's sword thrust forward like a flash of light, piercing straight through the sorcerer's chest. A shriek tore from Halric's throat as his body convulsed. In one swift motion, Aiden struck again, and the sorcerer's head fell from his shoulders. The body collapsed, lifeless, upon the cold stone floor. Aiden stood over him, breathing hard, the bloodied sword trembling in his hand. He lifted his gaze toward the heavens. "May justice be done," he whispered, giving thanks to the Almighty. He wiped the crimson from his blade upon the sorcerer's robe. Blood flowed across the floor like a red tide, but Aiden paid it no heed. His eyes were fixed on the shadowed doorway beyond, the path that led deeper into the fortress, toward his final destiny. Crossing the threshold, he found himself in a narrow corridor shrouded in darkness. His ring offered no guidance now, it lay still and silent. So he pressed forward, step by cautious step. Soon, the passage opened into a great chamber, dimly lit by strange pale light. Beyond it, he entered a grand hall, so vast it seemed a king's court, if kings had ruled in shadows. 6 doors lined the walls, all sealed save one, the very door through which he had entered. Aiden paused, uncertain which path to choose. But before he could decide, a deep rumbling shook the floor. Every door burst open at once. From each doorway emerged grotesque figures, half men, half skeletons, their bones clattering, their hollow eyes glowing faintly blue. In their hands they carried heavy iron maces tipped with jagged spikes. Aiden lifted his sword, but before he could strike, the voice of the ring thundered in his mind. "Stretch your hands forward as if in offering and close your eyes." He obeyed. A sudden weight filled his palms. When he opened his eyes, he found himself holding the same enchanted fat that had vanished upon his entry into the fortress. He stared at it in confusion until the ring's voice returned. "Use it to anoint the foreheads of these creatures. Only then will the path forward reveal itself." The charm that shielded you could not exist while the fat remained. Now that it has returned, the charm is gone. Remember, this is your weapon against the dead. Aiden looked down. Indeed, the amulet that had once hung around his neck had vanished. By now, the skeletal horde had surrounded him, tightening the circle. The hollow warriors hissed and clanked, advancing with their spiked clubs raised. Aiden knew this would be no ordinary battle. This would be a fight for his very soul. The first skeleton lunged. Aiden leapt high, vaulting over their heads, and landed behind them. The creatures collided with one another, momentarily confused. Aiden seized the chance. He slammed the enchanted fat against the nearest skeleton's shoulder. It shattered instantly, bursting apart like brittle clay. Another swung at him. Aiden turned and smashed the glowing fat against its skull. The bones exploded into dust, scattering across the marble floor. A third rushed forward. Aiden blocked the blow, But before he could counter, a heavy strike came from behind, crashing against his head. His vision darkened, the world spun. He staggered, barely conscious, as death loomed before him. Summoning all his will, Aiden rolled aside, swung wildly, and struck the creature's ribcage, breaking it in half. But his foot caught on a fallen skeleton, and he crashed to the ground. At once, several of the undead raised their weapons, bringing them down in unison. The hall thundered with the force of their blows. Yet through the chaos, the voice of the sorcerer, Halric's spirit, bound within the fortress, screamed in fury. "No, you cannot destroy what I have made." But the bond that tied his soul to the dead was breaking. With each skeleton's fall, his power waned. The remaining undead froze mid-strike, then crumbled to ash. Aiden rose slowly. Bruised and breathless, the silence that followed was heavier than the battle itself. Far away, in his crumbling sanctum, Halric's last echo whispered, "You may have ended my life, but you will not save hers." And with that, his vengeful spirit vanished into smoke, reappearing miles away, inside the royal palace itself. The guards cried out in terror as the sorcerer's shade materialized, solid and menacing. Panic swept the halls as he strode toward the princess's chamber, his eyes burning with hatred. He burst through the golden doors. The king and queen rose in fury. "Monster," the king thundered, "what evil remains that you have not yet done?" Halric sneered, "You sent death upon me. Now I return it, through your daughter's blood." The queen gasped, clinging to the princess's still form. The king stepped forward, sword drawn. "Remember this," he said coldly. "Evil never triumphs. The world itself rises against it when its hour is done. The Almighty grants the wicked time, only so their ruin may be complete." The sorcerer laughed, words of a doomed man. The captain of the guard crept behind him and struck, but his sword shattered upon Halric's shoulder as though it had struck steel. Halric turned, eyes blazing, and with a flick of his hand, unleashed a blinding light. The captain screamed and fell, his sight forever gone. The king roared, "You've destroyed another innocent, but by the heavens, I'll end you myself." He charged, swinging his blade, yet the steel rang uselessly against the sorcerer's shielded body. Halric's mocking laughter filled the chamber. "You see, no mortal weapon can harm me, but I will show you a spectacle the world will never forget." He turned toward the princess. "At first I thought to strangle her," he hissed, "but now I shall burn her alive. Her cries will be your punishment." The queen rushed forward, falling to her knees before him. "Please, spare her. Take my life instead." Halric shoved her aside and raised his hands, chanting words of power. Fire swirled around his palms. He thrust his arms toward the princess, and her body rose from the bed, floating through the air like a lifeless doll. Invisible energy held her aloft as she drifted toward the raging sorcerer. The king and queen ran to save her, but with another gesture, Halric conjured a transparent wall of crystal between them. The king's sword clanged helplessly against it. "Now weep," Halric cried, "for your daughter's ashes shall be my vengeance, and when that young knight comes to rescue her, I shall burn him too." He flicked his fingers toward the room's furniture. Chairs, tables, and doors tore themselves free, flying through the air and piling in the center of the hall. Wood cracked and splintered as the heap grew higher, a pyre fit for sacrifice. With a final motion, Halric pointed his burning hands toward it. Flames burst forth, roaring to life, the inferno rising to claim the innocent princess. The flames rose higher, roaring like a storm of fury. The pyre had grown into a mountain of fire, its crimson light flooding the great hall with a hellish glow. The sorcerer Halric's eyes gleamed with madness. He lifted the unconscious princess, whose fragile body lay near the crystal wall, and carried her toward the inferno. But just as he stretched his arms to cast her into the flames, a sudden cry of agony burst from his lips. His body arched, and a wound tore open across his abdomen. Blood gushed forth, staining his robes. He staggered, struggling once more to lift the princess. But pain struck him again, sharper and deeper this time. He cried out, losing his grip, and fell backward while holding his stomach. His body trembled, and in a moment, his head turned unnaturally as his strength faded away. A dark red stream spread across the marble floor. The great sorcerer let out one final cry as destiny's punishment reached him. His body shivered and shook until silence claimed him completely. Avenged the years of his cruelty. Then silence. Halric's body flickered, dissolved, and vanished into thin air. The king, queen, and their ministers stood frozen in awe. None dared speak, for they had witnessed not victory by sword, but the vengeance of the heavens themselves. Far below, deep in the fortress, Aiden, the knight, had faced his own battle. Before him stood the final horror, a cage wrought of iron, and within it prowled a creature from the pits of the underworld, a two-headed lion. Its 4 burning eyes glared at him, and fresh blood dripped from both tongues. The ground was littered with human skulls and shattered bones, grim trophies of its hunger. Aiden tightened his grip on his broken sword, now sharpened into a jagged spear. He knew this was the last guardian, the beast of prophecy. The creature saw him and roared, a sound so deep it shook the iron bars. It lunged, slamming into the cage with earth-shaking force. The metal bent, but did not break. Snarling, the beast bit the bars, tearing them apart with monstrous fury. Aiden watched, calm and ready. His heart was steady, his purpose clear. Then, with a deafening crash, the cage burst open. The lion leapt free. It came straight at him, claws flashing, both mouths open in rage. Aiden rolled aside, and the creature smashed into the wall. Before it could turn, Aiden thrust his blade deep into its back. The beast roared and spun, striking him across the chest with a massive paw. Aiden was thrown through the air, his breath torn from him. He landed hard but rose again, staggering. The lion lunged once more. This time, Aiden dropped low, and as the creature soared above him, he drove the broken sword upward, straight into its heart. The beast crashed to the floor, blood gushing from the wound. But still, it fought, slashing wildly. Aiden leapt atop it and struck again, and again, until the creature threw him off, rising on trembling legs. Blood streamed from its twin mouths, foam and fire mixed upon its tongues. Then, summoning the last of his strength, Aiden charged. He swung his sword in a single, perfect arc, and the blade sliced clean through both necks. A thunderous roar shook the chamber as the 2 heads fell. Blood erupted like a fountain, painting the ground red. The 2-headed lion staggered, roared once more in pain and fury, and then fell, lifeless. For a moment, all was still. Then, a strange, thick smoke filled the room. When it cleared, the lion was gone, and in its place lay the sorcerer Halric, his body mutilated, his throat pouring forth streams of blood. Aiden froze. This was no ordinary death. It was the curse itself unraveling. Then the voice of the enchanted ring echoed in his mind. The sorcerer's soul still lingers. The blood that flows now is not his own. It is the blood of the beast. Quickly, gather it before it ceases. Only this blood can heal the princess. Realization struck Aiden like lightning. He searched frantically for something to hold the blood. His gaze fell upon a human skull among the bones. He seized it, whispered a prayer, and filled it with the sacred blood. The moment the skull was full, Haurik gave one last choking gasp. His body shuddered, and the life within him was gone forever. The voice spoke once more. "Now close your eyes, brave knight. When you open them, you shall stand before the palace gates." A blinding light engulfed him. When it faded, Aiden found himself standing before the royal castle, the skull still in his trembling hands. At that very moment, the crystal wall in the great hall shattered, and the cursed fire died away. The king and queen, realizing the sorcerer was gone, rushed to their daughter's side. A royal guard burst in, breathless. "Sire, a young man has arrived. He brings the blood that will heal the princess." The king ran to meet him. Upon seeing Aiden, he embraced him with tears of joy. They rushed to the princess's chamber. Aiden poured the sacred blood gently over her feet, and before their eyes, the curse melted away. Her breath steadied, her color returned, and moments later, she opened her eyes. The hall erupted in cries of joy. The king proclaimed a week of celebration. The city blazed with lights. Feasts were held across the land. The poor were fed, and treasures were given freely in gratitude. And when the time came, the king fulfilled his vow. He wed his daughter to Aiden, the savior of the realm, and abdicated his throne to him. Aiden and the princess ruled with wisdom and mercy. Peace returned to the kingdom, and the people sang of their courage for generations. For once again, the truth was proven. No storm can break the mountain of faith, and no shadow can outlast the light of justice. Evil may rise in glory, but righteousness shall always triumph.